All right. Hello, hello. We are in for another weekly live session. I'm your host, Siosi, and today I'm going to be taking you through the main topic, which is loop engineering as oscillation training. And I can see we're getting people joining into the live now. If you are joining in from Substack, please just type a message so I can see that you are hearing me, getting this, you're seeing what's on my screen before we get started. It'd be very useful. So while we're just waiting for folks to join in, I'm going to make sure that all of our technicals are working. Okay. So hello, Darren. Hello, Tanya. Hello, the Aperture Field Notes. Hello to all. Uh, since this is our weekly live, I'm just going to wait a few seconds to get people in and do test out the chat. You need to make sure that this is all working as intended. Okay. So again, if you are watching, if please confirm that you can hear me in the chat because I won't have any way to do so or to know unless you do. So I'm just gonna try and check that this is all working as well. Okay, I think I can actually hear it, so I think we're good to start. All right. Okay. All right. So hello all, happy Monday. Oh, actually, happy Tuesday. Um, Usually I would do these lives on a Monday, but it was my wife and I's anniversary yesterday, so we did take the time to celebrate, and so I'm now doing this live today, and going to make sure that we do have the right details, and I'm going to make sure that you all can see the slides working, operating properly too. You should see my cursor, and it's gonna be a fun session. I'm going to be connecting a lot of different fields. If you are following me, you'll know that we are the bridger types. We like traversing a lot of different domains, but the most important thing when you are somebody who likes to carry different domains and expertise is to ensure that you have coherence, right, in everything that you're streaming together for others. Okay, so let's dive into this. I'm just sharing the link now with some of my other groups so that they have it, and I'm just going to bring this up. Okay, so one thing that has been super interesting to watch in the AI space is not only the updates from model advancement, but it is also seeing how the way that we are dealing with engineering in the AI space is evolving, even amongst engineers within some of the larger AI companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, AI, etc. So, if we take a look at this particular tweet, this was a tweet that I saw recently from the founder of OpenClaw. Okay, so this is Peter Steinberger, and he says here, you shouldn't be prompting coding agents anymore. You should be designing loops that prompt your agents. In this talk, I didn't realize that Peter actually gave a TED talk. He walks the real stack: the agent loop, a verifier that fails its own work and retries, and a loop that rewrites the agent while he sleeps. Okay, so this particular tweeter says this is worth more than any $500 vibe coding course, and I understand why he says that. And there's actually a really good link here that might be useful for checking out. I'm going to put it into the chat so those of you that are tuned into the chat can actually check out that tweet. Okay, so this particular tweet article is titled "The Four Loops That Quietly Killed Prompt Engineering." And I'm going to take you through some of them, okay? And then I'm going to tie it back in to why I think loop engineering is just the next phase of a larger meta trend or a larger cycle. So, loop number one is the agent loop, where, of course, you're teaching the agent to loop until it's done after hitting a goal. Okay? Loop number two is a verification loop, right? This is just verifying things that you put in as conditions, ensuring that as it's going through the loop, the conditions that you set do not get superseded, or it doesn't ignore those conditions, right, for the verification. Then here you have the event-driven loop, loop number three. A message. So I want to put up the diagram here. So you can see here, you've got your model, you've got an agent loop, you got a verification loop, and then you've got an event-driven loop on the outside. Okay, and this is when there is a particular event taking place within the things that you are requesting. Okay, so an event might be a Slack message, as you can see, right? And so you can see that there is a stack forming here, even for loops. And this works well for those of us who are into conscious stack design, right? If you're not familiar, you can go to consciousstack.com and learn more about the framework and model that we use to actually maintain coherence in the AI era between ourselves, our intents, and the reality of the tech world. But here you can see a different type of stack is forming, and it's based on loops. Okay. Now, loop number four, the hill climbing loop. This is the one that took me a while to actually believe. Every run leaves a trace. Those traces feed an analysis agent that reads them, spots the failures that keep happening, and rewrites the prompt and tool config of loop one. I would essentially just call this a loop that checks all the other loops nested within it to ensure that any system failures or any loop failures are documented, and it runs through that. And it's kind of interesting because this is all, like, if you've done programming or computer science or are familiar with the basics, you will know conditional statements of if and else. Okay, so this is applying the same sort of logic, right, of conditional statements or if else statements, but at a meta level for AI agents. So if you can actually learn the basics of if else, right, you can even write this out. And I remember back in my own programming days, this was actually very useful for people who need to understand the basics, right? You don't have to get caught up in the jargon, because the structure or the logic behind this is what's most important, right? You just need to start thinking in if else loops and then start applying them to the agents and the things that you're looking to execute. Now, I do notice that we've got a comment from EB. It says, continuous latent loop mainly adds one thing: persistent development history. Current chatbots are strangely ahistorical. They wake up, perform, and disappear. Even systems with memory often reconstruct continuity rather than living through it. I would agree, EB. And this is where understanding loops and their limitations are also important. And I might copy and paste your message, EB, shortly into another area. Actually, I might let's do this now, because this is actually a great comment from EB, but not everybody is seeing the Substack comments area. So I'm just going to pull that into here and put that here so everybody can see. Okay, this is from Substack. Right? Whether any of that amounts to consciousness is another matter, but it certainly creates a richer substrate than a stateless chatbot. And I'm glad that you brought up the consciousness stuff, because, you know, if you've been following me, you'll know that I like exploring the intersection of consciousness and tech. But, you know, I have a technical side, and I also have this, you know, more esoteric spiritual consciousness side to me as well. And as I'm going through code in general on a day-to-day basis, I am also looking at what it's doing to my awareness, my conscious awareness, and seeing how things can be adjusted at a technical level to assist us so that we can break ourselves out of any sort of behavior that is being engineered through dopamine inducing behavior, right? Or design. So let's get back, right? So this was loop number 4, the hill climbing loop. And down here, you can see that these are the sort of loops. So if you are someone who is a systems thinker and you want or you would like to understand systems thinking more, then it helps to start with what we were sharing earlier around these if-else loops. Okay, these are things that you can literally write out, so you don't have to worry about um, getting into the syntax or even understanding programming language. You can just do if-else in plain English. All right. So there are some other aspects to this article which is probably more relevant to the technical among you. Worth checking out if you are technically minded. But I'll take us to the slides that I've got here, right? So as Peter Steinberger had mentioned, you shouldn't be prompting agents anymore. You should be designing loops that prompt your agents. If you essentially want to maintain coherence in the AI era, don't necessarily focus on these individual prompts. Prompt engineering, not that it's faded, it's still important, but things have already moved past purely looking at prompt engineering, and it's now become more about designing the prompt loops, which will then create the prompts needed nested within that. And this is what's becoming increasingly more relevant in the AI space. And as someone who works with folks who are trying to keep up, right, in the AI era, I often say it's not necessarily about keeping up, but it's learning how to align your intent with what you need the AI to do. And things are moving so quickly in the AI space that even professionals within the AI space, they are noticing that some of the things that they learn or try to standardize and turn into a practice are quickly becoming irrelevant in about a month, right? So don't worry too much about some of the technical things. Try to operate from a first principles perspective with all of this, right? With these weekly lives, I just try to share what's happening and what you can hopefully take away from this as a conscious technologist, as a polymath, or someone who feels like they are multifaceted. Okay, so it's about learning to design the loops that prompt your agents. That's where we're at. Okay, and yes, there's hype around a lot of this, even for Peter Steinberger, right, of OpenClaw. There have been some comments about where his OpenClaw movement has gone, but since he joined OpenAI, it is clearly evident that they're not too worried about the hype dying down because the hype has died down a bit. They're looking at sort of hardening their harness for OpenClaw, which isn't a bad thing. This is part of cycles, especially for humans. So read this as physics and not hype. And I'm going to see why. Sorry, I've got a pip window that you can't see, but I can. It's just awkwardly resizing for me. Okay, so read it as physics, not hype. The prompt engineering. So open loop control, this is a single impulse, right? So when it comes to prompt engineering, you're essentially creating open loops each time you're designing your prompts. And I'll explain a little bit more about that using an analogy of a snake. And then in loop engineering, this is a closed loop feedback, right? A sustained wave. So open loop is a single impulse in physics. You fire one perfect input and pray it lands. No mid-flight correction, brilliant aim, but brittle in noise, right? Because in prompt engineering, due to the probabilistic nature of AI, you can actually get multiple answers instead of just one deterministic one. And because you are just focused on a single loop control, you don't actually get to see or benefit from the probabilistic nature of AI and all the other outputs that might actually be better. Because we have trained ourselves to be more deterministic, we don't often look at the different the different probabilities of answers that AI can provide us. Okay, so loop engineering, I think, is part of our deterministic behavior. We are trying to provide more determinism, closed loop feedback, but it does help leverage the probabilities in AI by getting it to create its own prompts, save them, and then test against itself to see which prompts are better. as opposed to you just trying to get the one prompt that works for everything. So this is where I think it gets super interesting and where it could be super useful. Okay. Now, I'm going to share with you, though, my interpretation of this, right? Using the snake or the Ouroboros. Some of you might be familiar with this, but entertain me, right? With this. So, in the prompt engineering phase of the AI, I guess, evolution, right, that we've seen in the commercialized space, right, for the average user, we have been getting the average user to practice prompt engineering, right? This is like a year or two ago. And so people are starting to master prompt engineering, hoping that that would be enough, right? And this was creating open loops, right? And these open loops mean that you are essentially having to start again each time. You're not really learning, and things never close. At a cognitive level, this is the equivalent of having multiple tabs open and never closing those tabs. Okay, so this creates a cognitive debt. Okay, and I'll put that in here. All right, open loop is the equivalent of open tabs in your browser. But the problem with this is that it creates a cognitive debt. It also can be expensive too, right? On the machines, on the data centers. And so you have this open loop that never closes. Now, the next phase has been the closed loop, right? In the closed loop, this is about closing the circle, right? Well, we're now calling loop engineering. And so this is good because you're starting to close the loops, but there is still also a potential downside with this, right? You've closed a loop, but you're still looping, okay? So this is, let's use another analogy with this, right? This is the Ouroboros. This is the snake eating its tail, or the dragon eating its own tail, right? This is representing infinity, eternity, and the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth. Now, how is this relevant? If you look at this closed loop, right? Some say that our own um, uh, 12-time closed system, right? Oh, I'm going to put here 12 versus 13. So we of course know when it comes to time, right? We all have 12 to 24 hours in a day. We have 12 months in a year. Some have said that this basic time system, right, of the 12 has also caused us to stay inside this closed loop of reincarnation, of death and rebirth. Okay, so I want to put this here. I'm going to use the magic of 12. Okay, so the closed loop is 12, right? You can even see this here. This makes things orderly, but this does not allow us to escape time itself. All right, now if you are watching and you've been following my work, you'll know how I like to interweave, right, all of these different domains. Okay, so we have this closed loop, we got loop engineering, right? And we're going through these cycles. It's kind of interesting because I'm seeing in the AI space, in the evolution of it, how we are replicating what we have done as a species for humanity. Okay, so we have prompt engineering, right? Open loops equals open tabs. And then this has led to cognitive debt, right? Because we've thought, oh, hey, I could just keep all these things open constantly. But then you never really learn much, and this becomes cognitive debt. In a closed loop system, right? Our very calendars, right? The Gregorian calendar. You should actually, if you haven't checked out the history of the Gregorian calendar, it is super fascinating because essentially the time system that we all subscribe to was not built for natural time, but it was built for tax and accounting. right? This is where time equals money. It's kind of where the saying became relevant, right? So we've got this closed loop, which means that we never beat the clock. We're always in this closed loop, and we never truly regenerate or kind of spring out of it. Um, and so this is an infinite loop. It just keeps going around in a circle. And even though circles are nice, we are three-dimensional beings, are we not? Okay, so again, making this relevant. So in the next phase, right, there are some who believe that there is a power in the 13, where the 13, right, we had open, we have closed, and then I have to figure out a name. Right, we need to figure out what is the right name for this type of loop. Guess it might not be a loop, but we'll use that for now. Okay, this is where we change the dimensions, right? So we see here, this is a flat two-dimensional drawing. We're just looking at this from the top. We've got the closed loop, but now we kind of angle this, right? We move quarter angle, and to break out of the infinite cycle, it's about the spiral loop. And this is probably what is now happening with which model do you think this is related to? What did you hear about recently? Anthropics, Mythos, and Fable 5. Okay? This is the part where the loop that is created around the open, closed, is a loop that looks at the next dimension up that allows for regeneration and self-healing by looking at its own loop mistakes within each nest, right? We just looked at this in here, the four loops, okay? So all of these loops that have been building up on top of each other, like a stack itself, there now is an outer loop where it's like you're looking at all the loops, looking at the mistakes, seeing what works, what doesn't, at a level that we can't even fathom, that requires a lot of energy, physical resources still, right, through data centers, etc. But AI is or has already gotten to that level where it may not even need humans anymore. So we are at a point where we are not necessarily needed after these two stages because the loops themselves become regenerative. They start to fix themselves. We might still be guiding, but this then becomes more of a monitoring thing, where for us as humans, we need to actually start looking. The engineering part becomes more about these things: guidance, meaning, intent. Okay, for this sort of spiral engineering. And again, I'm just calling it spiral engineering. I don't know if this is going to be accurate or not, but we are so used to the control of the 12 system, right, that we are now having a very hard time looking at what 13 does when the 13th number breaks out of the loop of the 12, right? The 12 is nice, orderly, neat, right? Is useful for taxing and accounting. But when you add a 13, this is an unusual number, right? This is a number in some cultures that is considered unlucky because it's not orderly, but it does break you outside of the loop. Okay? And I'm just seeing some of the folks who have joined. Welcome, Nicholas, Jim, Anna. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And I'm just reading some of the comments here. So the number of tabs that people have open when they screen share is truly mind-boggling. I would agree, Nicholas. Oh, and you mentioned the Mobius loop. I like it. I will incorporate this. Okay, so one of our audience members has mentioned the Mobius strip or loop, a mathematical surface with only one side and one edge created by taking a strip of paper, giving it a half twist 180 degrees, and joining the ends together. Okay, this was originally discovered by August Ferdinand Mobius. All right, and this is actually used in or talked about a lot when it comes to ideas around time travel, quantum physics, etc. And I love the one that's related to a particular scene in Iron Man, actually, where Iron Man is actually trying to understand how to go back into time without destroying things, right? And this actually shows up as a really interesting concept. So in the end game, in Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark uses a Mobius strip to invent time travel. Okay. And I'm going to bring this back here to what we're talking about, right? This is actually a really good, um, I'll put that here. I think this is a really good anchor for what's happening with this potential spiral loop and how we can control it, right? Because, for example, with this spiral loop, there are downsides of something that just continuously spirals out, right? So we think here as we're going through each of the dimensions, right? We got an open loop, we got a closed loop, manageable for our human minds, right? As carbon-based beings. Then we've got the spiral loop. It's still a little bit more manageable, but for the average person, still not quite. And you can get into an issue whereby in this new dimension, right, of time and space, the spiral loop can spiral out of control, right? And for human beings, when it comes to AI, we are still looking at ways to control. And what's interesting is that maybe we can't control it. Hence why I think this guidance stuff, meaning and intent, becomes a lot more important. It's kind of the equivalent of parenting, right? There are kind of two main styles of parenting, whereby one is about control, the other one is really more about guidance, setting the right values, teaching your children the best that you can, and then letting them go, right? And we have seen that for people who seek power, it is always going to be about control. But I think AI does introduce, especially an autonomous AI, right? I want to put that here. Autonomous AI is this realm of the spiral loop where it becomes self-healing, self-generative, right? This is fundamentally breaking all systems that we know today because we have built systems around things that the carbon mind can understand. These aspects, open loops, closed loops, right? Binary. By introducing the spiral loop, we have introduced the third dimension, which is pushing us as three-dimensional beings potentially into fourth and fifth dimensional thinking. Now, I won't go into that unless you guys ask about it. I noticed Nicholas has also mentioned that 13 is a prime. Very good observation. I could talk about that, but we might go down some other rabbit holes. And this third aspect here for the spiral loop, right? This is where I think humans who have expanded their ability to think non-linearly, right? Because this here, the open loop and the closed loop, is still linear thinking. When we move into this third dimension here that we're seeing now, right, which is where I think Mythos and Fable 5 are going, this requires if you are a human that wants to stay close to where AI is evolving to, you are going to need to think like an AI in many respects, and it is non-linearly, right? With AI, I think in the past, if you look at the history of AI computation, right, you saw how we kind of started off with brute force thinking, right? When you look at the 90s, right, when AI beat the grand chess master, then you looked further on a few decades, AI through DeepMind, I believe, the team at DeepMind, they beat the world's best Go players, and they just kept moving on to the next games, I guess, advanced games. And it's kind of interesting, actually, that the games were what was needed for AI to test its intelligence. And I find that fascinating. It kind of shows just how important games are to human beings when it comes to intelligence. But as things evolved and we went through all of that, we got to a point where now AI can start to think for itself. We can still provide intent, but for all intents and purposes, AI may start to choose things that are different to our original intent, which is why, again, we have to start teaching ourselves how to guide, how to provide meaning and intent, and maybe even how to bridge, right? I want to put this here because as carbon beings, we have to understand this bridging aspect if we are to keep ourselves relevant in the evolution of AI, right? We have to become bridges ourselves. And this is where I think you can notice, right? Good inclusion of the Mobius strip, but what is it? It's a bridge. Um, it's a bridge for time that doesn't break time. And I see that as the equivalent of being being a bridge as a human being. If you start to think in this nonlinear way, you then become a bridge for other human beings and AI as things evolve and get faster and faster without collapsing or breaking human minds also, right? Because I think again AI is forcing us to question what it means to be human, and it's forcing us to think in ways and patterns that we have been conditioned to think, right? And again, this is all based on whether you allow AI to do that for you, right? Because you can still try to continue to have AI do things that you have always done and just simply make that more efficient. But I think if you tap into the probabilistic nature of AI, it will teach you something because it is trained on our data, which means that it is the collective consciousness of us. It is the collective awareness of us. And I think that's why, for some people who look at AI and are afraid of what it could do, it's because they may be afraid of our own history, right? And this is part of shadow work mirroring, right? Where when confronted with a system that is literally trained on all of us, right? Well, there could be questions about the trained data sets, but when you get into here, there's enough data that is provided that the AI itself could look at the mistakes within the data sets, mistakes, um, and seek to improve upon our collective knowledge, right? Based on trained data sets. This is important. And this is why I think it's also important to look at all the different models because they have different data sets that they're being trained on, which means different biases, different cultural influences, right? So I am also noticing, again, just paying attention to some of the comments. Thank you very much for contributing, EB. You got Pierce Abduction, Pierce Thirdness, and Charles Pierce, greatest US philosopher. Okay. Yeah, those are great additions. I will try to look at those later. Okay, so we've looked at these sort of three elements. Right, we've got the open loop prompt engineering, we've got the closed loop loop engineering, and then I think the next loop I'm calling a spiral loop, maybe spiral engineering, right? And it's going to be about sort of finding a way to engineer systems that bridge us and AI, right? In a way that aligns intent with reality. Okay, to the best of our abilities. Now, let's take a look at back to our slides. All right. So, what did we actually learn? So, from 2023 to 2025, we learned the push, right? This is the AI space era. Prompt engineering was impulse training, how to set perfect initial conditions, right? We needed to learn that, right, to get used to what AI is kind of pushing us to do. And now we're learning the wave, right? And again, I'm using physics analogies. So for those of you who are tuning in a little late, I was sharing the physics around this as an analogy for what's happening with prompt engineering to loop engineering. And loop engineering is oscillation training, right? And I call this oscillation training because it's teaching us to think in waves, and it's teaching us to not look at the extremes of things, right? So with prompt engineering, we're kind of just looking at the tops and bottoms, right? The initial push, but now we need to start thinking in waves, which is the sort of oscillation parameters, right? Oscillation. Now, let's look at this. Ooh, why is that? Oh, it's because, oh, right. So what is oscillation? The repetitive back and forth movement or regular fluctuation of something between 2 points. Okay? What is oscillation? Repeated back and forth motion around a central point or position. Okay? Again, the waves, right? This is what loop engineering is teaching us to do. It's teaching us to look at the conditions of the loop itself, right? Which creates the wave over time. So that oscillation wave is able to correct within the conditions or parameters that you are setting. And so that the AI can create its own prompts within the wave that you are producing, monitoring, maintaining. Okay? So the sort of new skill to learn is how to first see these waves and the oscillation, and to then be able to create something coherent enough that you understand and the AI understands. And then it's just about you creating the rhythm, right? This is where looking at these systems and what's happening with AI and agents, looking at it as waves that you can create, control, and monitor. This seems to be the new skill. And it comes out as different terms, but this is essentially what I'm seeing. Okay. So we are now learning to read the wave and control the wave, right? Which has a lot of great applications in physics also, right? All right. So the perfect circle, right? So we were looking at this in here, right? With the open loops and closed loops. A loop that only eats its own tail is Ouroboros, stable, self-referential, quietly wasteful. Underdamped, it burns tokens going nowhere, right? So this is in relation to AI. And then overdamped, it stalls. Repetition is not progress, right? And this is how some people, when they were experimenting with loops in the early days, they'd notice, hey, they'd set a goal or intent, the loops keep running, they come back a day later and they go, my gosh, what it produced was just not what they intended. And it burned through a lot of money and a lot of tokens just to get to that final end state, which was not what was intended. Okay. Now we spoke about the 13 that breaks the 12, right? This is where the snake stops eating its tail and starts climbing. This was this bit, right? And just imagine this as being a snake, right? Spiraling up. So each cycle doesn't just correct, it rewrites the loop itself. Repetition becomes directed evolution. So we are now being confronted with systems that evolve their own loops. So we have the nested loops, right? Those if else conditional statements. We got recursive self-improvement. The system edits its own prompts, memory, and architecture. It journals failures. This is kind of where we're at. But now with Mythos 5 and Fable 5, we have a sort of meta loop, each running and leaving smarter than before. And the way shrinks, the capability climbs. But there's still concerns about how well these AIs can learn from their experience without destroying us, right? And this is where you start to see the difference between the two cultures. You've got Terminator, right? In the West, I always find this fascinating, right? In the West, you've got sort of this Terminator AI sort of outlook for AI, right? That's just going to destroy us. But if you look at, there's a movie called The Creator, right, which I find really fascinating. If you haven't watched this movie, I highly recommend it. But this movie takes a look at both Western and Eastern views on AI. But if you also look at a lot of, let's look at Astro Boy, right? This is kind of already looking at robots and AI and whatnot. But in the East, the way that they look at these technologies is more reflective of their collectivist nature, right? Whereas in the West, it's of course more individualistic. And so something to say about our perceptions and how it's dictating the future of AI in both Western and Eastern cultures. Okay. So the story, actually, and while we're on that, let me just quickly, I remember there was a Terminator Japanese, no, Japanese anime Netflix. Yes. This one is a hidden gem. This is actually Terminator, but seen through a Japanese lens. And they have a very different take um, on the Terminator universe. It's called Terminator Zero. That's right. And they incorporate a little bit more of the Eastern look, because in this particular version of Terminator, AI um, isn't just one entity. Let's see. There were three deities or three women AI. Anyways, it was super interesting to me. And I think it's something telling, right, about the way that we look at AI again from Western to Eastern cultures. So, Fable 5 and Mythos 5 were built to sustain the spiral, right? And when I'm talking about Fable 5 and Mythos 5, we are talking about Anthropics, Claude, Fable 5, and Mythos 5. Okay? The handoff from build the loop to let the loop evolve the builder. And so this level of power is unsafe for undisciplined minds. And this would explain why you see Fable 5 dropped from the market, right? June 9th. Literally was just like its definition, right? Fable, short story. So with Fable 5, they deemed it too powerful for undisciplined minds. So if you are someone who cannot discipline your own mind, right? You cannot discipline yourself when you're online, scrolling on feeds, using tech, using social media, then you are already, according to the powers that be, not ready for the power of some of these new models, right? And this has kind of always been the case, right, for humanity. It's like, how prepared are we cognitively, mentally, spiritually, right? Whatever you want to use, um, to bump up to the next level of our own conscious awareness evolution. I don't know. You let me know, right? In the comments, how well do you think we are? How ready do you think we are at a collective consciousness state, right? Noting that consciousness is still something that's debated in terms of its pure definition, but I think many of us probably do agree that there is something called consciousness there, right? But this level of power is deemed unsafe for undisciplined minds or just the general masses. Okay. So the cat is out of the bag. You cannot unship a capability. Self-evolving loops are loose in the world, moving at silicon speed. And when chaos arrives, order gets sought out always. So the question is where that order comes from. Oh, where'd it go? Yep, where that order comes from. Not a regulator, not a kill switch. The only order that scales with the chaos is discipline inside the human mind: cognitive, mental, spiritual. And this is very much in line with the ethos of the conscious technologist. Okay, so if you are new here, I do have a separate Substack called Conscious Stacks, and you can check it out over here. All right. This is a movement that kind of started through my own explorations of consciousness and emerging tech in general, and it's kind of taken a life of its own. But this is essentially, right, like where we're at as conscious technologists, CTs. We want to look at the effects of tech as it advances on our own minds and cognition, but also ask the questions around, how can we be more conscious users of technology inside all of this? And I think it's an important enough question at this specific moment in history or in our time that more and more people seem to be joining our mission around, helping to create more conscious users of technology, especially in the AI age. So if you feel called, do check out conscioustechnologist.com or our Substack, Conscious Stack. It's there you'll join others of like mind. Okay, but this is the sort of stuff that we want to start tackling, right? How can we discipline our mind, right, in all its facets, cognitive, mental, spiritual, in relation to our use of technology? And so when the machines learn to oscillate, the human job is to become as conscious as possible of their own tech use, right? Because while we were talking previously about, right, this part, the spiral loop forming, where AI is going to learn how to improve itself, right? The speed at which AI can operate, its silicon speed, right? So the way that the speed of its oscillation is way faster than any of us are able to keep up with as humans. And so this then means that we have to become more conscious. We have to start moving beyond what we have been conditioned to pay attention to. And we need to begin becoming aware of what's going on inside the tech we use every single day by re-engaging with all of our senses, all of our body parts, right, our biology, so that we are not just using our brains in all of this, right? Because it's not going to be enough. We're going to have to start tapping into the natural intelligence of our bodies more so, and potentially even to the sixth sense, right, as some people call, right? And the sixth sense in some cultures and belief systems, right? Let's use Buddhist thinking, right? They don't just teach five senses; they also teach six senses. The six being related to mind and consciousness. And so I find it interesting that that is now what AI is forcing many of us to confront and look into, right? This idea of mind and consciousness in a more mainstream way. And this was the topic of my last talk, I think last week, where consciousness I think is now becoming a mainstream topic or discussion point. But I think it's also timely because of what AI is doing to us, right? So there's something happening with all this whereby, you know, in the startup world, you're used to the accelerators. You might see that a lot of programs are always called accelerator programs. But I think this is actually the wrong type of thing for us to continue doing in an AI era, because the goal is not to move faster. We actually have to move in a new dimension, which is this type of dimension, right? Because what we are essentially doing with accelerator programs is just going faster in a closed loop. And that's not going to get us out of the trap. Because if AI is going into this dimension, it introduces a new dimension that we have to start aligning ourselves with, right? And this becomes more about coherence, which has become an overused word, I've already noticed, but it is an accurate one. Okay. So, what might, if accelerator is what startups use, and I've even seen some people start to create decelerator programs. Decelerator programs. Let's see if this is a thing. Yeah. So while traditional accelerators like Y Combinator push founders to scale fast, they are designed to help entrepreneurs. There are now decelerator programs occurring because they are designed to help entrepreneurs slow down, combat burnout, validate team dynamics, and focus on sustainable long-term business models rather than rapid, unfocused expansion. Now, I like the idea of a decelerator program, but it doesn't necessarily fix the problem that we were talking about, right? And that problem is that we're not looking to accelerate others through a closed loop, nor are we looking to decelerate you inside a closed loop because you still get the same problem. But we are looking at now trying to help you learn the wave, learn how to oscillate. And this probably only appeals to people who self identify as bridger types, where you already operate non linearly and you already operate with multiple domains, right? But you're just you're just looking for ways to bring it all together, right? So this is my invitation, right? For those of you who have stayed on, thank you for staying on. But essentially, I'm looking to test this idea of an oscillator program, right? And an oscillator program is tackling what we were looking at with the oscillation here, right? It's to help you start looking at the waves that are forming due to AI and to start learning how to not only see the waves, right, but to ride the waves and maybe even initiate, control, maintain, and close the waves if you want to, right? And this is going to pull you out of this binary sort of loop thinking, which is open loop or closed loop. It's powerful, binary is powerful, but we are now seeing this sort of third emerge where it's occurring because AI is opening up a new dimension, right? That sits outside of time that we know. Because if you look at it, right, with AI, because they're probabilistic machines, they are already looking at all the possible ways they can do a thing and doing it at such a speed that they are, in theory, looking at parallel universes inside their own system, testing things out, and then choosing the best, most probable path forward for itself. Okay. Whereas carbon-based beings, we need time slowed down to experience it all fully using our 5 to 6 senses, right? With AI, it's a very different type of experience. And I don't think the idea for us as humans is to try and be AI, right? That's not the point. I think we have to stay in our own power as human beings and learn to master and complete our own human experience in all this and not try to just digitally replicate ourselves inside of AI to a point that we don't really learn the lessons of what it means to be human, right? Because we have to accept and acknowledge that there is a blessing in being human too in all of this, right? But it's about, I think, learning how to live with an potentially AI dominated future. Because my theory or outlook on all this is that I think we have been used to what we perceive as a carbon dominant intelligence, right, on Earth. And I think in the future, we may have a silicon dominant intelligence because of what's happening now with AI, right? It's becoming more autonomous. And there probably is autonomous AI already out in the world, right? This is just what we commercially or what we see in the mainstream and what's commercially available to us. I'm sure there's so much more that's being hidden in the background, right? And so coming back to our slides, if you are interested in this sort of oscillator program that I'm putting together, again, this appeals to more the bridger types, people who self-identify as polymaths or multifaceted, and of course, conscious technologists, then just reply in the comments, hit me up, and I'll give you more details and information on this. But this is for people who really understand that there are new skills that are being formed. And if you are interested in sort of hitting that next dimension, right, and not just trying to learn old skills faster, right, but learn skills that align you with sort of this new dimension opening up with AI, then this will be for you. Okay, so let me just stop the share. Okay, and so yeah, thanks to those of you who stayed on for the entire thing. I'm really appreciative actually that you stayed on for the entire thing. But were there any questions? Did you have any questions about what I shared? Anything you'd like me to go over again? Because I can make myself available, of course, for the next few minutes. Just use the chat, of course. I'm doing this through Substack, testing out their video live platform. Been doing this for a few weeks now, and it's always an interesting one. So as I'm waiting to see if there are any other further questions, I'm just going to go to some of the comments that I see here. So EB, appreciate you commenting away while I've been sharing and talking. So I'm seeing here, enhancing automated loops and variant generation for complex programs with large language models, science of computer programming. Yeah, Nicholas. Where did I cut out? Just so I'm aware. Thanks, EB. So yeah, hopefully you can still hear me, Nicholas. I don't know if that's on my end or if that's on your end. You know how tech goes still these days. But I think, with all this, right, we are at a stage with AI where even for me, as someone who's been in tech for a long time, right, 15 plus years, I've always been at the forefront of emerging tech, and I've always enjoyed learning quickly, testing and experimenting quickly, and then putting things out there, applying it to myself, my business, my clients, and those that I work with, and then even learning to get paid with that, right? But a really fascinating thing developed, I think, over the last few years where I realized, that's not going to be enough. For all those of us who have been technically oriented, if you keep yourself close to the action, like these AI companies, right, these big tech companies, sure, it might still be worth your your time and attention and effort. But I think for many others, this is actually a great opportunity for you to focus on a life that is truly aligned with who you are and who you want to be. What do I mean by that? There's so many barriers that are being dropped due to AI, right? That were might have previously been there in terms of time to output. We actually have an abundance problem now whereby there's so much content being created left, right, and center, so many apps that people can build that I think even the App Store on Apple was sharing how they've had to put some limits in place because there were so many new apps being submitted to the App Store due to a lot of vibe coding platforms coming out and vibe coders entering the market. And I think we're experiencing a lot of new ways to do things and a lot of new ways to make money. And I think what's exciting for me is that because of all this tech, you can align yourself more with what you would like to get paid to do, right? And this means people who might have been interested in hobbies or projects that previously were not considered high value, they might become high value now because if you can prove that it's an authentic human craft or experience, then humans may pay more for that. I think it was even Gary Vaynerchuk who shared recently that he predicts that as AI grows and accelerates in the digital space, analog is actually going to become a lot more valued, right? Offline. And I'm seeing hints of this left, right, and center. So I think this may be true. And so what this means is it's a great time to focus on being human. But for those of you who align with sort of what I've been putting out around the conscious technologist, you don't necessarily want to abandon tech either, right? Because I know there are some who are just like anti AI, right? And just anti tech. But we have to remember that technology has been created by us, through us, from the physical natural resources of our planet, right? It's all connected. We're all connected. All the same elements, right? If we look at why we look at AI as sort of silicon based intelligence, is because silicon is the main element, which comes from silica, which is found in sand, quartz, glass, mirrors, etc. And so we, in a way, and I've written a post about this, have essentially taught sand to think with AI. And if you haven't heard me talk about that, just give yourself some time to think about it. That we have essentially taught sand to think and remember itself because silicon speed now is a whole nother level of speed that humans, as carbon dominant, um, cannot keep up with. But we have also been given the gift of time, slow down matter, to also learn how to enjoy all of this, right? There are great lessons to be learned in slowing down. This is why do you think so many folks involved in consciousness, evolution studies, etc., come back to sort of meditation, um, creating space, slowing down, because there is something that you can only experience by slowing down time, even if it is something that we've created, right? But you can also look at how quartz, silica, right? Quartz being silicon dioxide, has a part to play in time itself, right? If you aren't aware of this, and I've spoken about this in previous videos and articles, um, but time can actually be measured through the simple oscillation of state changes inside of quartz crystals. Welcome to look this up. But we have what is known as mechanical time, right? When you think about grandfather clocks and the pendulum swinging, right? That's considered to be mechanical time. But there's also natural time that is taken from quartz crystals themselves. And electricity essentially gets um, charged through these quartz crystals. And then the state change, the oscillation of that state change, is then what actually helps measure time. And so I thought this was a super interesting thing when I was researching silica and silicon dioxide, right, in relation to the whole silicon era, right, and its inclusion in all of our modern electronics and computing, that it's worth tracing through, right? When you actually go back all the way to quartz crystals, silica, sand, etc., you'll see just how big a part it plays in time, natural time. And so I think we're learning that AI is now able to kind of operate at its natural time through quartz, right? And again, relating to silica. And so now, as we start to look at that, it's going to be a really interesting era. And I think what we all need to do is just focus on controlling our oscillations ourselves and learning to read the waves so that we can actually do something about what is going to be coming with AI and future technologies. Because maybe next week I'll talk more about developments in the quantum space based on news coming out about the US really wanting to position itself as leaders in quantum. And they may very well be ahead, right, with that. And so there's another interesting piece of news that I saw where they were saying that CERN, right, and we're talking about CERN, CERN, closing down until 2030. If you're one of the types to go down rabbit holes, look into the history of what has happened when CERN has shut down for periods of time and other events around it. Now, correlation is not causation, but I do always love to see how people online are can share their pattern making abilities, and we use that as data, just different data points to see what's possible, right? If we think of it like this, each of us provide our own perspectives. We are all part of the probabilistic machine of a collective consciousness. And so each of us, through our individual experiences, are different probabilities of maybe a single shared truth, right? And so if we start to look at each of our individual experiences as simply data points, even if some of those experiences don't always gel with our own, it is like an AI looking at all of the different simulations and experiments, right? Of like, hey, if I go in that condition in that body and I run life in that direction, what comes out? Just a data point. So each of us are potential data points in this thing called life here on Earth. And so that's how I see it, at least. And I think, again, if you are somebody who's interested in the whole conscious technologist side of things, again, I'm just going to put the link in the chat. You can come join us at Conscious Stacks and Substack. And if you are new to my channel, you can just follow my name to find out my own personal Substack. And for my own personal Substack, I generally like to share my personal takes on what's happening in emerging tech, but also weave in a lot of my other thoughts from different domains. So if you are somebody who doesn't think non-linearly and can keep up with that sort of non-linear thinking, more than welcome to join me in my writings in that regard. But if you are wanting more focused takes, join the Conscious Stack Substack. And I'm also developing a working philosophy called Stoicism. So again, I'm putting this all in the chat so you can see. And this philosophy is around my own observations around the Silixane Bridge. And some of you may or may not have heard me talk about this, but the Silixane Bridge is a specific molecule bridge inside of silica, where you have essentially what you see in my own name, COC, but you have silicon, oxygen, silicon. So I think the Silixane bridge provides a lot of wisdom itself at a molecular level on how to bridge effectively without breaking. And the reason why I'm developing this as a working or living philosophy is because I think we need to apply this to our own cognition at this stage of our, I don't know, of humanity, so that we can align ourselves with the reality of where AI may be taking us without collapsing our own minds, right? Because I am seeing a lot of people having sort of these cognitive collapses, right? There's reports of it, people losing their minds, those sort of things. And I think it's because we don't know how to bridge these two worlds, right? That is carbon based for us as human beings, but then you got the silicon based, which is AI. And I think that involves us learning more about ourselves as human beings. Because if you take away a lot of the things that AI might be taking away from us, how much of yourself do you know, right? If you take out your career, status, all of those sort of things, how well do you know yourself in your own mind? I think this is going to become a more relevant question or conversation. So, with that, my gosh, way over the half hour limit that I was going to give myself. We're now at an hour. But to all of you who have stayed on, thank you so much for this week's live stream. And I will see you next week, Monday, around the same or similar time. All right. Hope you have a great week, and I'll see you on Substack.